Good morning, good morning. It's Feedback Friday, and I'm just going to explain. I'm in Dress Down Friday. As a little bit of chit chat before we see if anyone comes on live, I just want to talk to you. Who remembers Dress Down Fridays? I'm very fortunate. I didn't have very many of them before I left the corporate world, but I remember absolutely hating them because it meant I had to think about what to wear on a Friday, whereas having a uniform was so much easier. But my apologies, I do have a uniform for myself. As you know, I will have my detective hat on, and I usually have my bright colours, etc. to go with my branding. However, I have worked out that I really want to fit in a third lot of exercise every week, and I know that I can do it on a Friday morning between 8:30 and 10:30. But if I don't get dressed straight into my gym gear, if I have one extra step, like I have to get dressed into my work stuff for the video, and then I have to go into my gym gear, it's like one bit of effort too much. Whereas if I start in my gym gear, then I am more likely to go and do my training. So I am going to be here on a Friday in Dress Down Fridays in my casual wear, usually probably my gym gear, because I'm going to be going off to do that. Today I'm going to talk about two things. The main thing is about changing your story to change the response. I want to share with you a couple of things that I was working with a client this week that I think is really important for all of us to know about this stuff, because it can make a massive difference to both your performance and your relationships. And I hope by sharing this, it'll give you some opportunities to think about these things over the weekend, and that if you are not feeling like you're working, learning and living your very best life, that you'll have at least your first step that you could take to change the response. Because the way you talk to yourself, the way you talk about yourself and your situation can and does impact your performance and your relationships. So a quick story then. A client comes to me, she's feeling very anxious. She's finding that the phone, she's dreading answering the phone because there's a particular client that's really causing a lot of stress, that they just loggerheads with each other. They both work in a very different way. It's like everything this person does, it seems to be arse about face. It's just not the way that they work, and so they dread this phone call. And when we started to unpack it and actually look at it, is that one of the things we do on the 7-day Make It Happen motivator is on day 7, we look at you and your story. And one of the exercises I invite people to do is go back through your story and actually go look at the turning points. So there will be things that have happened in your life, and actually look at what is the lesson. Because what can happen, if we've had something, a trauma. So in this particular case, this client had spilt something as a child and got told off. Then when she very first working world, one of her very first clients, quite a tall guy, deep voice, had shouted at her because he wasn't happy about something. As it turned out, she didn't do it wrong, and she sorted out the problem. But the problem is, whether you're an 8-year-old or you're a young adult just going into the workplace, what can happen is that the brain freezes time when there's a trauma, and so it freezes it just the moment before, so you don't have to relive that experience. It's a great tactic. It definitely works for women in childbirth. However, what it doesn't always do is unfreeze it straight after the trauma and go, you are okay. So one of the things I was doing with my client yesterday was going back and going, okay, so what happened after being shouted at? And she said, there was forgiveness, and there was compassion, and there was understanding, and everything was okay. It was just that moment of, we've spilt it, we've damaged it, we're trying to fix it. And so what's the life lesson? That we make mistakes, we get over it. So when we went back and rewrote the way that she told the story, and looked at what worked about it and what that taught her and how that made her the person she was today, it was no longer this 8-year-old who was feeling like that she was a big disappointment to her parents. The second incident, that was a work one, again, looking at what worked, there was lots of parts of that story that weren't being heard, they weren't being told. It was the first person that she had to work with after, before she was formally qualified. And actually, she said she was battlefield ready. There was never going to be a more challenging client after that. And so she actually took on some great jobs afterwards, because, there could never be anything as bad as that. But she actually referred to that situation as a trauma. And so, knowing that you've called it a trauma, it's a shock to your system, and going back and actually going back, oh, what this worked, that worked, I learned this. So we spent the time yesterday talking about and reminding and holding on to what did those moments in her life actually teach her? What was the value of that? And then once we've done that and we come back to the client that was bothering her at the moment and the dread of the phone calls, it turned out that actually all of that was to do with these built up things. So if it was you, now this client's worked with me before, so we've undone lots of things, but what can happen in our system is we have these lots of little things in our lifetime build up, and then one little thing you think, oh my God, I'm overreacting, why can't I just do it? And it's because it's not a just. Your system is remembering all of these other things, but it's only remembering that frozen moment just before the trauma, the shock, the getting told off as a youngster, or something not so good in your work life, early work life, or your young adult. And it builds up, and if you don't go back and revisit and actually give what worked about it, what it taught you, the value of it as equal opportunity, it can suddenly be like a curveball right now where it just suddenly knocks you off your feet and you think, God, my behaviour just isn't reasonable. It's not realistic. So I'm going to share that with you, and I want to invite you, if you want to share it with here, or if you want to send me a private message. But one of the activities we do on the 7-day Make It Happen Motivator is that we look at going back through your story and actually look at the turning points. And so you might look at some of the things that really didn't work, but going back with the purpose of going, actually, what did it teach me? What was the good thing about that? So my divorce is part of my story, and I often used to talk about it being really horrendous. But when I started coaching and I got coached and I was asked questions, the very first coaching seminar I went on in May 2006, one of the things I realised is that I'd had the courage to leave. And actually, my mum was one of 7. There was nobody in my family divorced. I felt like I was the worst person on the planet. I was a failure. But actually, I had the courage to leave. And I know now it was absolutely the right thing to do. But I could just see that I failed. I broke my family up. I was not a very good wife. That was the story that I was telling. And coaching forced me to look at that and actually go, what's the other part of this story that's not being witnessed, that's not being honoured, which is the stuff that worked, the lessons, the strength. So that's one of the things I invite you to do, is go back over your story and look at your lessons that's learned. And then I usually share today a little bit about some of the things I'm noticing about my own personal patterns. So for me this week, one of the things I've noticed, and I've just put out a call out to my own mentors and my own peer support, is that one of my patterns is that I have a fear of being excluded, and so what often happens is I exclude myself before I can get excluded, because it's less painful if I exclude myself than someone else saying you can't come. And so I'm just noticing that at the moment. And so that's the thing about when you're really listening to what you're saying, what you're thinking, what you're doing, and comparing it. If you're saying one thing and doing another, and you get curious about your patterns and you start to look at your processes, then you have choice. Because what I know is that there are times when I want to be included, and there's times also when I want to exclude myself or exclude others, and I don't want to feel guilty or bad about it, because my fear of being excluded, and I know it comes back to days when my mum used to send me to Coventry and not talk to me for 3 days. But I also know that it came from, so the times when she really gave me a voice and said, I really want you to tell me how you feel, but I would speak, but she wasn't resourced to listen to what I had to say, and wasn't resourced to be able to listen to my emotions. And so I ended up with this, trying to do the right thing was the wrong thing. And then I didn't know how to belong. I didn't know how to be in the group. I didn't know how to fit in. And so then I felt like I was excluded because everybody else seemed to be getting it just right and knew how to fit in. And that's been my life journey. I've been unpacking all the different rules that I've got as a result of those and various other things that have happened through my lifetime. So what are your patterns this week? If you listen to how you talk to yourself, what story are you telling yourself? Write this. Are you talking about an amazing week that's gone really well? If so, share it with us. If you're talking about things that didn't go so well, absolutely honour it. If you've had a pants bit of news, if you've lost something, a contract, a client, a friendship, whatever you've lost, those emotions need to be witnessed. Absolutely. Honour it. But if you're telling the story about what didn't go well over and over and over again, and you're not giving yourself the opportunity to learn the lesson and say, actually, what's working about the way that I'm handling it, or what's working about, maybe this horrible thing that's happened, if there's the only thing you can find that's working about it is that actually you now know what's really, really blimmin' important to you. Maybe that's the gift. And I know it's not easy to find the gift in those moments, and sometimes we do need to sit with that grief, sit with that thing, and you'll have to do that how long you want to tell the story of what's not worked, and the pain and the sadness and the loss will be personal to you, and there is no right or wrong, and it doesn't matter what anybody else says. It mostly other people want you to move on quicker because it's hard for them to listen to it, not because how long you take to do it is right or wrong. It's just it is physically challenging for humans to listen to another human being who's sad and hurting, and it's even harder for us to listen to things that repeat over and over again because our brain goes, oh, this is taking too much energy, and it doesn't bother to listen. So as a recap, I want you to think about, I'd love to know your stories about Dress Down Fridays. Did you love them or not? Secondly, if you look at your story over a long period of time, what are your turning points? What were the great lessons that your turning points have taught you? Please share those. And lastly, just Feedback Friday, looking just at this last week, what's worked for you, what's not gone so well, and what could have worked better. And when you learn to tell your story from a place of equal opportunity to what's working, what's not working, what could work better, you change the way that your system responds to that. If you always talk about what's not working, you always talk from a place of criticism of yourself and others, then you are very likely to put yourself into a stressful state. You're going to have stress chemicals. Your body and your brain are not going to be able to be at their optimum. You are not going to be able to make decisions fast under pressure, and you're not going to be able to communicate with clarity and confidence what you want. And then when other people throw change at you, you will not be in your best state to manage it. Change is a permanent state of life. It is going to happen, but actually learning how to manage yourself in order to be able to manage your time and other people's expectation comes down to being really, really clear about what you want. And it's really difficult to do that if you are in a state of criticism and contempt for yourself and others. So I hope this inspires you to have an amazing weekend. I'm knocking off early again this Friday. I feel very cheeky. Finished early last Friday, finishing at 3 o'clock this week, and I'm going off to a festival. Hope you have a gorgeous weekend, and I'll be back on Motivate Monday at 9 o'clock, where we'll be thinking about, we've just done a bit of reflecting on what's worked, but then we're going to start thinking about what you'd like to have happen if next week was just the way you'd like it to be. And I'll be sharing with you some of the things that I'm working on, but also my clients, and I'd love to hear from you. So please share below. It's always great to have an engagement with people, and have a fantastic weekend. Speak to you soon.